So I've been talking with Wally, and I think you saw in one of his videos about his Illinois haul, one of the items was a huge bench vise. It turns out it's a Prentice. So he and I were talking about it, and he was asking me about it, and he described a hole being in the top of the vise, right where the anvil would be on a regular vise. And I said, Wally, that sounds like a swivel vise. So he got to looking at it, and sure enough, he found it's a Prentice. It's a Prentice 5-inch swivel jaw vise. Really nice. So he's been cleaning it up. Well, it was missing the pin that you see in this picture that I downloaded from the internet. So what I had him do was, and it's obviously a tapered pin if you look at that. So what I had him do was, after he got it cleaned up, I had him mic the very top of that hole, and then that hole goes all the way down through the main body of the vise, and it's a through hole. Comes out just above where that column slides through the body of the vise. And so I had him measure the top and then measure the bottom from underneath. So I have my taper and an overall length, so I want to make sure this pin doesn't go down and rub on that column. So the idea behind the pin is just to lock the vise in the straight position. It's not a pivot pin or anything like that, but it's just a means to lock it straight when you're not swiveling it. So I'm going to make them one, and I'm going to get busy and lay one out. It shouldn't be a very hard turning project, and I'm just going to try to copy the shape that you see in that photograph as closely as I can. And then, of course, the most important part is the taper itself. But obviously, that's just a head form, so where you can lightly tap that pin into place after you get the vise straightened out. And then there's looks like there's a little bit of a recess under there to probably get some sort of wedge or something under there to extract the pin when you wanted to swivel the vise. So I'm going to get started on that, and we'll see you over at the lathe. Right, so I'm going to start this with I'm going to make it out of 12L14 because that happens to be the only stock that I have that is big enough. And I think that'll be fine. The pin is simply meant to be put in position and then tapped lightly home. I don't think it has to be hardened or anything like that, so I think the 12L14 will be fine. But I've just cut a piece off on the bandsaw, so I'm going to face it, and I've got it in a 1-inch collet, and simply because our collet chuck was already mounted on the lathe. So we're going to get it faced, and I'm going to try to stay out of your way so you can see what I'm doing. Alright, little bandsaw makes a pretty square cut. So now I'm going to loosen this collet and pull out enough stock. I've got this Sharpie mark on all of it so I can do some layout. Alright, I hope you guys can see this. I have a little scribe line right here, and I have brought my tool up and set my carriage stop to stop me right there. So the major diameter of the taper is 800 thousandths, and we're going to be turning this 1-inch bar down to that diameter for this length before we actually go to turn the taper. And then I have some extra bar in here that I'm going to be bringing out. They'll be forming a little bit of a striking head, and then a means to get a wedge under there and pop this pin out should you want to swivel the vise. I've got that set for a pretty fast speed just to get the metal hogged off. Alright, I've set these calipers for 825, so we'll go down until these just slip over. and then we'll approach 800 slowly, and then of course when we start turning our taper, the taper will terminate here at 800 and it'll gradually reduce in size down here. And I wrote down the measurement. It's over there on the workbench. Of course, we'll be feeding that by hand because we're going to be doing that with the compound rest. So I'll come back when I am set up to do that taper, because it's just a bunch of turning right now. And so I stopped that diameter at about 804 or so. Since we're dealing with a taper fit, I think it's going to be fine as long as I get the geometry right. And so at the end of the section that's going to taper, I provided an undercut because they have one on the little picture, and then I'm going to form that other piece I started turning down a little bit. I'm going to form that into a little bit of a head that can be gently struck and driving the pin home into its seat. Okay, we're not dealing with much of a taper at all. That is essentially half of the pin we need to make. So I just use that as a gauge and just work back and forth, and I've got it pretty darn close. So we're going to start turning our taper here, and I'm just going to take it about 20 thousandths at a time, and going to stop down here when we are at 660, and hopefully when that is at 660 we'll have come out the other end of the taper at this point. So here we go. Alright, now I'm going to start measuring this end and slowing my feed way down to get a better finish on this. And I might touch it with a file when I'm all finished just to smooth it out, because I am hand feeding and I'm probably not as steady as a power feed. Okay, for most of this I have had my big floor fan on because it's just hot in here. But I've turned it off. I've got the taper finished and it measures 660. I put a little file chamfer on there, but right at that end, before I chamfered, it measured 660. This is exactly 800, so we're good on the taper. And now I'm just making just a little bit of a head for the pin. Kind of freehand, no formula or anything like that, but I'm just turning about a 30-degree taper on that. And then we'll finish parting it off. I'm going to finish lopping that off on my bandsaw because my parting tool is not quite extended out enough. I was cutting some tubing the last time I used it, but I've only got about 1/8 of an inch of peg left, so I'm going to saw that off and grind the end, and we'll look at it. Alright, well there you go. I think that's going to work for you, Ron. We'll get this into the mail for you tomorrow, so you can get that vise up and running. So there we go. Fun little project. Haven't turned a little compound rest taper in quite a long time, but this one turned out pretty good, so I think that'll fit the bill. Alright, this is a little addendum to the video. So I contacted Ron, let him know this is ready to ship, and he made one little request. So yeah, sure, why not? There you go, buddy. It's on the way.